When I, 22 female, was about 14 years old, my family and I went to a resort in Antalya, Turkey. The resort was relatively small, and every day there were plenty of activities that involved all of the guests. For example, pool games, competitions, sports, etc. The restaurant was a cafeteria style, so everyone ate together. As a result, basically everyone at the resort knew each other well. We knew each other's names and became pretty tight-knit after a few days. There was a middle-aged bald British man named Danny and his two little kids, who were about 2 to 4 years old. Everyone at the resort seemed to really love this family, as he was a single father who was on vacation with his 2 cute little children, so they became popular very quickly. At one point, I was walking back up to my room when I heard another guest at the hotel say my name, in the context of volunteering me to help Danny with something. I went to see what was going on, and the other guest told me that Danny needed help taking his kids upstairs because they were badly sunburnt and he couldn't carry them both at once. However, the other guest was busy with something, so he suggested that I should help Danny instead. I didn't really think anything of it, so I picked up the little girl and walked with Danny and his son towards the elevator. We eventually got to his hotel room, and I tried to drop off the girl by the door, but he politely asked me to place her on the couch. Unfortunately, I was naive and too trusting, so I thought it wouldn't be a problem for me to just step in and drop her off quickly before I go. Worst case scenario, I could scream, and people in the neighbouring rooms or hallway would hear me. So I stepped inside, and as I dropped Danny's daughter off on the couch, he closed the door and turned the lights off behind me. It was pitch black because my eyes hadn't adjusted yet. Then I heard him leaning close to my ear and say, "Kids, say hello to your new mummy." I instantly got goosebumps all over, and my heart dropped. Whenever I tell this story to anyone, they always say that he was probably kidding, but I can assure you 100% that he was not. I panicked and started feeling up the wall for the light switch or the door, and he could tell that I was trying to leave, so he said, "Aren't you going to stay and watch some telly with us?" But I had finally found the doorknob and just made a run for it. I ran downstairs crying in absolute fear. When I tried to tell my family, no one believed that he was being serious or creepy, because they had all met him and thought of him as such a sweet and loving single father. I didn't see him the next day or in the following days. I think he must have checked out. I'm just glad I got out of his room. When I was 18, a friend and I heard this story of when Charles Manson was released from prison. He wanted to go to the Devil's Staircase in a town 3 hours away that was also a ghost town. The story is that there is a staircase to hell hidden somewhere nearby. It was also mentioned a man was watching the area on Manson's behalf. Of course, being 18 and stupid, we decided to meet my friend in the bigger town outside of it and head out. We pulled in to see what was a very small town with a row of boarded up homes and possibly a store from decades ago. We parked on the side of the road just to take a peek around. Looking back, I'm so glad this was during the day. We walked about 10 steps and we saw a man riding a horse bareback towards us. He looked filthy and had a face that was worn. Through the few teeth behind his lips, he asked us,
"What are you doing here? Are you the kids that came here and burned down the old church a few months ago? They had a car that looked just like yours."
We answered that we were on our way to a town a couple hours west and noticed signs leading here. He knew of this town and said that he's not a fan of anyone in that town. He then asked if we were from there and we told him no. He proceeded to say,
"It's a good thing you aren't from there, or I'd have to shoot you. Got the plots dug up already."
Of course we were crapping ourselves. apologizing for even stopping, and he said,
"Tell everyone in Williston I'm coming with a gun."
Then he rode off. We ran to our car and got the hell out of there. A few years later, I was telling this story to a new friend from the larger town nearby I mentioned earlier. She said that her and her friends went out there, since it's buried in old coal mines, so that they could drink, because they were underage. Whilst out there, they found about 20 expensive cars that were parked all over the land. They saw a huge fire in the distance, but got freaked out and left. She believed there may have been a satanic ritual occurring, because she knew of the Devil's Staircase story. Before I continue with the final story, if you've enjoyed this video so far, please leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to see future content from me, as well as help me in the algorithm. Thank you. About 5 years ago, I, male 26, set out to travel the world. Being straight out of college had left me in debt, ever more desperate for any job I was overqualified for, and generally depressed. I felt isolated and alone in my small town in Washington, and found the only way to get out: travel. My high school buddy suggested I look into woofing, worldwide opportunities on organic farms, and volunteering as a way to travel cheap, and so I did. The way it worked was quite simple. You worked for around 25 hours a week on some farm for food and housing. The draw is that since the community of cheap-ass travelers is quite big, it is a great way to meet new people, get outside of your comfort zone, and just let yourself live and figure life out. Fast forward 8 months, and I'm a seasoned cow shit shoveler. I started out in Washington, Oregon, and went south to California. There, I was able to save some money I was paid under the table for some extra work, and was now faced with a decision: where to go in the world. The excitement of being able to purchase a ticket to almost anywhere in the world got the best of me, and on the advice of my dumbass hippie volunteering partner, I chose it at random. I went to a randomizer website and clicked the country button. Georgia. The country of Georgia. To say I didn't know anything about it was an understatement, but the fear of the unknown made it exciting and exotic somehow, and so I did it. I purchased a ticket and started browsing for a farm that could host me. There were few options, and most were remote and didn't have an internet connection. I messaged every single one because few ever responded, and got a response from one farm on top of a mountain. The pictures showed a traditional Georgian stone house with a large garden out in the back, a family with several cheerful children, grandparents having dinner, animals. It seemed warm and inviting. The description was written in good English, and the requirements for work seemed reasonable. I was excited. After I flew in to Tbilisi, the capital, I followed the directions that they had sent to locate the farm, which wasn't an easy task. Few in Georgia spoke English. The roads were awful, since few had been maintained since the fall of the Soviet Union, and the country is generally poor. It took me around 20 hours of Soviet buses and taxis, weird serpentine roads and paths, to get to that desired blue pin on my map. It was a dirt path leading up a steep hill into a national park up in the north of the country. There was nothing for miles on end but trees and silence. As I got up that hill, I saw the house about half a mile away on an even steeper hill surrounded by trees. From that viewpoint, it seemed abandoned, overgrown, brown, and dreary. As I walked past the gate, Geary, the apparent owner, approached me. He was a heavy, small, middle-aged guy with a big smile on his face. He also smelled of booze. He shook my hand and in broken English started to show me around. As he was showing me around, I noticed that there wasn't anyone there but us. I asked about his wife and kids, and he brushed that aside and said something to the extent of, "They're away right now." By this point, I'm creeped out. From browsing around, it was apparent that the farm was in deep decline. Apple trees and crops were dying. The roof of the small barn caved in. The house itself full of trash and smelling of mould. It was obvious that Geary was going through a rough patch, but I wasn't going to turn around and just leave in the middle of nowhere, without a plan, having not slept for the past 36 hours. It was evening, and after feeding me well, and trying as best as he could to hold a conversation in English, Geary showed me my room on the second floor, and I went to sleep. I almost immediately blacked out from the exhaustion and stress, and would have slept for 10 hours if I wasn't awoken by a strange noise in the middle of the night. It sounded like something metallic and heavy was being dragged across the wooden floor. In that sleepy in-between state, I listened to it for a few minutes, thought nothing of it, and went back to sleep once it stopped. In the morning, Geary, now sober and grumpy, asked me to repair some of the windows and doors in the house, as he himself planned to go and fetch some components in a nearby village. Again, I got this weird feeling creeping down my spine. Something wasn't right. He didn't maintain eye contact and was evasive. There was no cell reception, no internet. Once he left, I checked around the house to get a general idea of the place, and it became apparent that the place was hardly ever lived in. Like one of those abandoned houses. There was broken furniture, newspapers, and old photos on the floor. A shattered mirror. I took my phone and looked through the saved listing again. The photos didn't match. Neither the backyard, the garden, or the walls. Geary wasn't in any of them. It was a completely different house. Now, by this point, I'm full-blown panicking. I packed my things and began to leave when I saw a group of 3 men going up that first hill. There weren't any other paths I could take, so I went behind the house and rushed down this hill into the forest. After some time, I stopped and listened. I heard them in the house. They were clearly looking for me. Afraid of making any noise, I remained still, hidden behind a bush. I don't know how long I waited, but they were persistent. At some point, I heard them leave, so I counted until some large number and proceeded back into the house and path. Once I found it was all clear, I booked it the hell out of there. I've never run this fast, but I was still in the middle of nowhere. No traffic, no public transport. I reached a paved road and started walking in the general direction from where I remembered coming. Hours passed by, and finally, a car drove by and stopped. Now, in a horror movie, this would have been Geary and his friends, but this was actually a really nice Russian family that gave me a ride to town. The listing disappeared from the website a few days after I left, and I haven't heard from Geary since. I've yet to make sense of that experience. I have travelled since and volunteered too. Some people, once they hear this story, laugh and say that the guy was coming over with a couple of friends from the village to have a chat over a few beers. Some say he was bound to kidnap and kill me, but I trust my gut feeling. Something was really not right.